Starting. There we go. Cool. So I'm on the line with Naveen Jain, who's a serial entrepreneur. Shouldn't need too much introduction. Behind several very successful startups. Also sits on the board of a few notable organizations, including SpaceX, from what I understand.
That's the other Naveen Jain.
That's the other Naveen Jain.
Is that the other Naveen Jain?
Yeah, I've met the Naveen Jain. He has the same middle name as me too.
Oh, really?
How confusing is that?
Very confusing. We've been at conferences. I don't want to tell that story.
All right, moving swiftly along then. But Naveen, I was reading on your bio that apparently you were also an early Monero miner.
Yes, I am an early Monero.
That's also the other Naveen Jain. No, it's not.
Wow, you guys, I hope you guys have met in person. Sounds like we need a death match to resolve all this.
I agree. Only one Naveen Jain.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's the only solution.
And of course, the other voice on the line is Riccardo Spagni, better known to many of us as fluffypony on Twitter and elsewhere, lead maintainer of the Monero project, also one of the magical crypto friends, which is becoming increasingly more important, along with Samson Mao, Charlie Lee, and Well Panda. Check out their YouTube channel if you haven't already for not only the most entertaining, but probably also the best informed commentary on what's happening in the crypto space at the moment. So guys, thanks for joining me. We're talking about Tari today. Lots of interest over the last couple of days with the announcement coming out about this new protocol that you guys are launching for digital assets. Maybe just to start off in your own words, what is Tari and who's it for?
This is you.
So Tari is a digital assets focused protocol that's being architected as a merge mine sidechain with Monero. And we think there are lots of really interesting types of digital assets that could be a good fit for such a protocol. Some examples may include things like tickets, loyalty points, virtual goods and games, et cetera, et cetera. So that's at a very high level what Tari is.
Great. And I suppose for the few people who might be watching this who aren't aware of the digital asset space, of course, with the introduction of digital scarcity that came from, I suppose, originally the bits and pieces that made up Hashcash and eventually Bitcoin, we now for the first time have the possibility of a digital asset, something that can be scarce and online and digitally stored, which is massively exciting, but we're still kind of figuring this space out, what it's good for, and who's going to end up in prison because of it. But I suppose the obvious question that you guys get asked is that we already have several platforms for digital assets. One of them, of course, is Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin's project. There's also Neo and several other platforms. So you guys have obviously seen an opportunity for something that these platforms aren't doing. How is Tari going to be different from, let's say, Ethereum?
Sure. So I think a lot of these projects are not really focused. They're like Ethereum, for example, it's the world computer. And then somebody writes a smart contract that lets you issue a digital asset. And then the first, crypto kitty that gets launched, crashes the entire thing. And that lack of focus and that overgeneralization ends up with a project that is basically trying to boil the ocean. And whilst I have no problem with people trying to build anything in this space, go if you're actually building stuff and not just outright scamming, go ahead. But the reality is that if we want something that can handle digital assets at scale, it's going to have to be digital assets focused. And so the things that are digital assets focused that already exist are really like colored coins and Counterparty. And so a lot of the inspiration for Tari comes from Counterparty. In fact, our very first model was, can we port Counterparty to Monero? And ultimately, we decided that was too much, it was too much groundwork and too difficult. And so we're writing this thing from scratch. But it's, the functionality for digitally scarce assets already does exist with Counterparty in many ways. We do believe that we can do it in a way that is a lot more scalable and a lot more extensible.
I think another way to think about this is that whenever you're building any sort of a software system, there are trade-offs that you make. So when you're trying to build a decentralized application system, regardless of what the platform is, common trade-offs include scalability and security. At least centralization becomes also a trade-off in the design of many of these systems. So I think what we are really saying with the Tari project is that, hey, you know, if you really focus maniacally on digital assets, you can potentially make a different set of trade-offs. You can choose different trade-offs. And so you can still potentially build a system that is highly decentralized, highly scalable, and highly secure by focusing the functionality. So this isn't a system that can do every possible thing. This is not a system where you can build some very sophisticated decentralized application and have it work at scale. So I think from our point of view, the trade-off conversation is one that we should also be having, and that's part of the core philosophy with the Tari project.
Yeah, I guess things like smart contracts, even back to colored coins, they were sort of a secondary idea that came after, you know, the primary purpose of a blockchain like Bitcoin being used for currency. You know, and then it was like, oh, well, you know, we can include all of this other data in the Coinbase of a transaction, etc. And this was, you know, projects like Rootstock, etc., sort of came on as a sort of a secondary idea. With you guys building Tari on top of Monero, though, I suppose a lot of people will say, well, you know, that's the same kind of process. You're taking an existing blockchain platform or protocol and you're putting this on top of it. So just to get more practical about it, how exactly will Tari sort of interface with Monero? And are there economics built in similarly to how Ethereum handles transactions with its gas system, etc.? Maybe you can just give us more specifics about exactly how Tari will work and what it means that it's built on top of Monero.
Sure. So it's built, as Naveen said, as a merge mine sidechain. So the idea behind merge mining is you already have an existing set of Monero miners, and the mining pools that they use will be able to run a Tari node, and then all of those miners will not only receive their normal Monero payout, but without needing to do anything extra, they will also receive a Tari payout as a block reward. And it functions like a normal proof of work currency would. So there's a block reward and there's transaction fees and they're bundled together. And then obviously the pool splits it amongst the miners that did the work. The thing that's really cool about merge mine sidechains is, you know, recently there's been a lot of noise about the amount of electricity that proof of work cryptocurrencies are consuming, and about how that's bad for the environment. So now you can imagine there would at least be some ethical dilemma if we were going, let's build a new protocol and also spin up a bunch of miners because, you know, they need to mine this new proof of work algorithm that we've just created or whatever. So by building it as a merge mine sidechain on top of Monero, we're not burning any extra electricity. And I think that is obviously advantageous. And we're binding ourselves to Monero's security model, which is advantageous because we believe that Monero's security model is quite strong. And then the last thing is in terms of interaction between the Monero chain itself and Tari, we're busy working on an atomic swap scheme, which will allow people to perform atomic swaps between Monero and Tari in a decentralized, permissionless way.
Okay, cool. I mean, one of the reasons people love Monero is because of the privacy component as well. I suspect that'll be something that's baked into Tari. I'm just interested in your thoughts about how privacy plays into digital assets, especially if we look at the kind of emerging market, if you will, for digital assets. Privacy is something that quite specifically isn't part of a lot of the digital asset projects out there. So how important is privacy? Is it something that sort of comes out of the box with Tari because it's built on Monero? And what do you think that means for digital assets?
Sure. So Tari itself is going to have different privacy claims to Monero. You know, as Naveen said earlier, there's always trade-offs, and the same goes for privacy versus scalability. So where Monero leans more strongly in the privacy side in favor of scalability, with Tari, we're going to lean a little bit more on the scalability side and still have extremely strong privacy claims, but, you know, privacy claims that are a little bit weaker than Monero's. The upshot of this, though, from an assets perspective, is every asset issuer will be able to decide how strong, what strength of privacy they need. So as an example, if you are issuing an in-game asset or in-game item, you might decide as an issuer that you don't really want people to know when that's trading hands, who owns it. These, you know, there's privacy there, and you think that that's important. But maybe another entity or asset issuer that's using Tari is issuing a token, and maybe they're a charity, and maybe for not only for regulatory approval reasons, but just for ethical reasons, they say, well, we're issuing this token, and it's traceable. It's completely not private. Anyone can take a look at it. It's, you know, not even on demand. It's just all out there. And so they can like move that privacy slider all the way to the other end. And there's various settings in between, you know, like maybe you don't want to obscure the movement of it, but you do want to obscure the values. Or maybe you want the values to be exposed, but not the movement. So there's various settings in between that asset issuers will be able to use.
Okay.
I think it's really interesting to think about privacy as a spectrum, and allowing digital asset issuers to configure it. Another really interesting use case from a privacy standpoint is the ticketing use case, where you have venue owners and promoters really want to know and need to know who is coming into the venue. So if a ticket is sold to an original purchaser and then it's transferred to another purchaser, the venue and the promoter really, really want to know who is entering their building, just strictly from a physical security standpoint. Because there have been threats that have been made. There have been terrorist events that have actually happened at major events in multiple countries around the world. And this is now a very serious issue. If you talk to any promoter or venue security person, this is something that's absolutely top of mind for them. But the current architecture around centralized ticketing systems don't provide any of the sort of traceability capability. So I think that's a really interesting use case as well, or an example where a lighter privacy setting may be valuable to this particular type of digital asset issuer.
I like that. Privacy is like gender; it's a spectrum. You mentioned game sort of items, which bring to mind things like, you know, gear and weapons in World of Warcraft. You've also been quite vocal about how blockchain too often gets used for things that it's not really, or that aren't really a good candidate for blockchain technology. You're essentially using a very slow database when you could have used a very quick one, etc. How do you see us getting the kind of efficiencies that would be required for like a gaming ecosystem and items in a gaming world, where at the moment, if we're honest, blockchain is just not very efficient for those kind of use cases?
Yeah, look, I mean, we can, the way we're architecting, or the way we're hoping to architect Tari with the burgeoning development community, is to basically use what I consider a very modern way of thinking of a blockchain, and that is, how do we store the minimal amount possible on the actual chain itself? So that gives you great advantages when it comes to you know, syncing up to the chain, and having almost like a shared state that is as a result of a very, very small amount of data. So that's really powerful in terms of on-chain scaling and so on. But you're ultimately limited by the throughput between nodes. But what we can do is we can offload a lot of stuff to off-chain scaling systems like Lightning. And I think that then becomes really interesting, because we're not losing the advantages of the underlying chain. We still have things like, or we can still see things like provenance, or whatever we need. You know, we can still be certain about the overall number of assets, or the non-fungibility of the asset, or whatever it is, and yet we get these massive scalability benefits. So there's a lot of stuff like that we are that we're designing and that we're thinking through, because I think that as a digitally assets focused protocol, scalability is obviously top of mind. A lot of assets have a very bursty scalability requirement. Tickets, as an example, you know, when the ticket goes on sale, you know, you sit on CompuTicket refreshing 1,000 times, and then you eventually give up and buy it on Gumtree, and which of course is not a fantastic experience either. And the same goes for like games. You know, like a lot of games have particular periods during the day when there's a maximum number of users online. And so the demand for scale will be a lot higher than you know, at different times of the day.
Okay, now I'm picturing virtual swords being locked up in multi-sig wallets. But the big question is, will I be able to launch my ICO on Tari? I know how much you love those, Riccardo.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm a massive proponent of ICOs as a way to scam other people. And look, you know, we can't control use cases. The functionality certainly does exist. And I think the only thing really that I want to say there is the only two things. The first is that I have yet to see anyone design an ICO without a pre-sale that has a public sale that is fair. You know, all the public sales, a lot of them have got, you know, like little tweaks to try and make it slightly more fair, but ultimately the eth millionaires are buying it up in droves, and the little guy in the street ends up getting left behind, and, you know, so on. The second thing is the privacy system that we're building, or that we're hoping to build, and those levels of privacy that you can set might make it very interesting from a regulatory perspective, because then you can issue an ICO and set the privacy to like non-existent, and you know, for regulatory reasons. And that might be something that an organization like the SEC can demand. They can say, well, you know, ICOs in future need to have no privacy, and so therefore must comply with the following.
Okay, interesting. And that brings me to, I suppose, the economics, because unfortunately the discussion in blockchain so often gets sidetracked by people looking to make a quick buck. You've mentioned that Tari is going to have its sort of own unit. How are you planning to roll those out? What are some of the dynamics there? And can I get an airdrop?
Well, Naveen's decided that there's only one thing we're airdropping.
Oh, you're talking about hugs?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Hugs. Oh, guys, you really are like Ethereum.
Yeah, we offer hugs. So would you like a hug?
I'd love a hug, guys. A virtual hug. You can send it to me on Lightning. We'll settle up later.
Yeah. Look, the design of the economy. I mean, again, this is an open source project, so we have an idea about for the design of the economy. We haven't presented it to the community yet, and community. We want to explain how we arrived at that design, and we want to get their input. We're so far away from launch that nothing is finalized, but we believe that we can design an economy that leads to extremely good alignment of incentives amongst all the participants.
Okay, nice. And of course, I mean, most people are going to look at this and go, right, you're out to kill Ethereum. Just to put a finer point on it, because you did touch on this earlier, but do you see this coexisting with Ethereum, and Ethereum still offering something that Tari doesn't? Or if you're successful, do you just see it replacing other protocols like Ethereum and maybe Neo, which is very similar, I guess?
It's a good question.
If I may answer, we have a philosophy here.
To send out hugs
our philosophy
to all of the Ethereum devs.
We're not here necessarily to badmouth other projects. Maybe one of us is.
What?
I'm teasing. No, but in all seriousness, look, you know, we've stated our case in terms of why we think a digital asset focused project makes sense. And I know there are many people out there who are pursuing decentralized application systems, whether it's EOS or Dfinity or Tezos or Ethereum or whatever. I mean, there's a bunch of people out there working really hard on these projects. And we're not going to sit here and say that those things don't deserve to exist, but Tari does deserve to exist. What we're very focused on is saying, look, here's what we're building. Here's how we're going about it. We're going to work with this nascent community that's starting to coalesce around Tari, which we're very thankful for, that people have interest in what we're building. And then at the same time, over the next, the coming months, you will hear very specific go-to-market strategies from us. Here is how we're actually going to engage with the business community, with other communities, for people to actually use this darn thing. And from our point of view, we want people to look at Tari and say, wow, this is great tech. This is a great community. It's a great ecosystem. Lots of alignment of interest. These guys were really thoughtful, really intentional in terms of the design, and they really collaborated with the community. They're high quality stewards. They're deserving of trust. And oh, by the way, they've actually created something useful. People are actually using the thing. So that's actually the agenda here. And that's what we would strongly prefer to focus the conversation around.
Yeah. And I think, like, I remain unconvinced that dApps are important or have much of a use case. I also would like to be proven wrong. But there's definitely a future world that exists where dApps in general are largely abandoned, and then Ethereum's only real use is as an assets protocol. And then sure, in that world, it's like, you know, do you choose Ethereum for your digital asset, or do you choose Tari for your digital asset? But as it stands right now, Ethereum is a whole different thing, and Tari is in that space, and Ethereum's in this space.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and one of the big challenges there, as you've said publicly before, Riccardo, is there's user experience design in the blockchain space. I always say it's like buying a Tesla, but you have to get it in the body of a bus. You know, I come from a fintech background as a product manager, where you start with user experience design and then you worry about the technology, and we're kind of going in the opposite direction in the space. So it's going to be interesting seeing how that emerges. This is also an open source project, so obviously you're going to be looking to build a community of developers around it, I guess. But you decided to focus the development team in Johannesburg, from what I understand, which is a curious choice I'd like to talk about. You've got some, great names on the founding team. It looks like you guys have managed to raise some funding to get things going. But talk a little bit about getting this off the ground, A, and B, why you've decided on Johannesburg as a destination for Tari's HQ, especially when you're from Cape Town, Riccardo. Why are you leaving this glorious rain and all of this wine for Johannesburg?
Well, I'm not moving to Johannesburg. I live in Plet, and I'm staying in Plet. I'll just come up to Johannesburg now and then.
And I visit Plet.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think to answer that question, so the first thing is, the way we structured it is, like you said, it's an open source project. Tari Labs in Johannesburg is not the owner of Tari. It's not the sole development community. And to correct him, I think it's not the HQ. What it is it's a team of developers and researchers that we're putting together, and they will be one of the big contributors to the development of the Tari protocol. But they will not be the only contributors. There will be people working externally that will contribute as well. Obviously, the same way as there are with Monero. People pitch up and they go, hey, this is a cool thing, I want to work on it. And so I think that's kind of powerful, because we're not creating a dev team and that's their sole job, is to build the Tari protocol to the exclusion of people on the outside. There's no decision making that happens in Joburg. It's literally just developers and researchers going, how do we help the community make this a reality? As to why Joburg, a whole bunch of reasons. I've got offices here already, so I'm up here all the time. That's advantageous. I know the landscape, and we found that there is an incredible amount of nascent talent here, of untapped talent, and talent that is working at banks and
poor lost souls
institutions, and like they are just itching to work on something exciting and modern and fun. And that's what Tari is.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, amen. I spend a lot of time in Johannesburg too, and there's such a vibrant community around fintech in general there. But you're right, a lot of those skills are unfortunately locked up in the banks. All right, guys. Well, it's been great chatting to you. Unfortunately, this was kind of last minute, and we didn't have too much time today. I know you guys need to run, as do I. But good luck for the launch and getting this off the ground. And I look forward to watching the progress. Can't wait for my airdrop. And it'll be. It'd be great to catch up again in a few weeks or months and see how things are going. There's my alarm, you see. The reminder, my phone has spoken. Yeah. All right, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.